that very kind introduction, which does me far too much credit. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor to be here, but nevertheless, I stand here with a bit of unease. The reason is I haven't done enough. But not just me. My whole generation has failed to look ahead as we should have done. The fact is that as our society gets more and more complex, both the effects of what we do and the solutions to what we do become more complex also. And I hope the next generation will not only do as much as ours and also have as much fun as ours, but in addition will do much better at looking ahead. And this is really, I think, what we're here to discuss today and for the next 2 days. And with these thoughts in mind, I'm putting it to you that universities have a special and irreplaceable role in securing the future for people. Now, I shall be talking rather in terms of science, both because I am a scientist, that's to say natural science, because I am a scientist, and because in natural science we see sharply certain dilemmas, but the arguments apply equally to all strands of academic activity. And furthermore, in referring to universities, I have in mind the whole range of academic institutes, public and charitable, and foundations, not least, of course, the Eugenides Foundation, which has done so much to further Greek education and to whom we are indebted for hosting us here today and at the meeting to follow. The vision of the foundation over half a century has been inspiring young people to feed their curiosity about the natural world, to marvel at the ability of humans not only to understand, but to control and alter it, and so, in due course, to participate themselves in those endeavors. Now, I think a key factor in scientific education, most particularly expressed through interactive museums, such as the one here, is to maintain the spirit of playfulness with which we begin life and which is so easily discouraged and even more in the past perhaps has been beaten out of us. In fact, a distinguishing feature of human development is the prolonging of childhood, with the downside of lengthened dependency, but the huge upside of exploring in individual ways rather than solely by received experience. And we have a splendid example of such playfulness in this year's Nobel Prize in Physics, announced last week, which has gone to a pair of researchers at Manchester University, Geim and Novoselov. Many of you will have heard how they managed to obtain a sample of a novel form of carbon called graphene by the simple expedient of peeling layers off a piece of graphite, such as you use in your writing pencils, with a piece of sticky tape. Child's play indeed, but then applied systematically and alertly to determine the extraordinary properties of this substance, which we shall soon be using in many of our gadgets, hence the prize being awarded. Now, both aspects of the work were needed, of course, the playfulness and the systematic investigation. And it's important to recognize the second because it's fashionable in some quarters today to decry the accumulation of knowledge, to consider that all is relative, and today's instant idea is as good as that thought out and tested over many years. Such relativism is misguided, because a second distinguishing feature of humans is our ability to record and transmit our collective experience, both horizontally in the present to others and vertically through time to succeeding generations. And getting the balance right between these opposing requirements of play and systematic investigation is crucial. Crucial not least in the practice of science, where we manage the conflict by accumulating knowledge but always being a little skeptical of it. And often we make advances by trying out things that others say won't work. At times, it's helpful to be unaware of negative findings, and perhaps people told Geim and Novoselov that their method wouldn't work, but if so, they ignored the pundits. These considerations are rather nice for me because they give me an excuse to avoid reading, which on the whole bores me, and instead fiddle about and play with things, which I enjoy much more. One of my earliest mentors, Francis Crick, had a sign on the wall in front of his desk that said, "Reading rots the mind." Now, Francis's sign was partly in jest, of course. He was actually tremendously knowledgeable and erudite, but it had a hard core of wisdom. In natural science, we don't refer to ancient scientists very much. We don't disrespect them. We're all aware that we stand on the shoulders of giants, but their work is melded into the general understanding, constantly refined and added to, and there's no reason, except for general interest, to go back and see what they actually did, what they actually said. And so rather ideas are constantly, if erratically, tested against reality. And that's something we may consider as we come to the other aspects of today's talk. Now, there are many different motives, both for doing and funding science, but through its processes of internal communication, it results in a growing body of knowledge and understanding. And peer-reviewed publication, in particular, gives us some assurance of accuracy and allows the attribution of credit for achievement. And there are occasional spectacular leaps, though nothing like as frequently as the headline writers would like, and as my interviewers this afternoon tried to extract. What is the latest breakthrough? But irrespective of motivation and leaps, scientific research frequently does give rise to goods and services that are novel and valuable. And this process has latterly come to be known as innovation, and indeed many regard innovation as the sole purpose of science. But this can be misleading in two ways. First and obviously, taking a short-term view of innovation is hopeless because the greatest advances arise from unexpected findings. So it's important that a lot of science funding is directed towards more general investigation. I mean, for example, to see the key role of uncommitted research, one has only to think of the revolution in biology in the mid-20th century, what we now call molecular biology. And that was resourced by organizations like the Medical Research Council in the UK, the Pasteur Institute in France, National Institutes of Health in the US, and so on, all of which looked beyond short-term gains. So there's a message there about what we should be doing now. But secondly and profoundly, science is a cultural driver which challenges and reshapes our perception of the human condition and of the universe around us. Now, is this a justifiable end in itself? In any case, any increase in understanding eventually leads to improvements in human life, and that expectation, if you like, is sufficient justification for research that has no immediate practical goal. George Porter, one of our middle ancients in the UK, remarked that pure research is merely research that has not yet been applied. On the other hand, what is the purpose of human life? I'd say I don't know, and indeed there may be no answer, but for the moment, exploring in every way possible, and science is one of our best techniques for doing that at present, exploring in that way is a pretty good reason for continuing our existence. When the destination is unclear, traveling hopefully is a good strategy. So you may be wondering when I'm going to get around to the university. Well, a major role of the universities is exactly to accommodate and nurture these diverse goals, to find ways to do research that's not financially profitable, indeed to play, and to keep alive the flame of thought. And what we don't recognize sufficiently is that all of this is vital to the well-being of society. And it's vital for us to think about that because in the last few decades, there's been a trend to increase the funding of science from for-profit sources invested in the expectation of financial return, and concomitantly to decrease funding from not-for-profit sources. So the picture that's emerging more and more in our universities is one of increasing private ownership of the scientific process as a whole, reaching back into the most basic elements. Now, this trend is welcomed by political leaders who are able to save taxpayers' money. It's welcomed by investors who gain more control of the direction of research. A win-win situation, no? But the downside is the channeling of science into financially profitable areas and the concomitant appearance of neglected areas where there is no immediate or obvious return on the investment. And these changes are of great significance to the issue of greening, which we shall in various ways be addressing over the next 2 days. Now, some of my interviewers this afternoon asked me what we meant by this phrase, and I don't actually know, but I replied, sustainable development, flourishing rather than merely surviving, and avoiding destruction of the rest of the living world. I look forward to hearing further interpretations, but these three will do for this evening, but along with, and crucially, global economic governance, which underpins all the others. Now, despite much talk of the green economy, such developments are not going to happen automatically. If greening could happen spontaneously under a business-as-usual scenario, then it would. In fact, in certain specialist niches, it does. But for the most part, it's going to take organization and intervention to change some of our practices. Now, as a way of exploring what's required, I'm going to focus in on the recent history of human health. This is partly because it's a well-researched area, but the conclusions apply forcefully to the more overtly green fields, including climate change, food security, energy, the world financial system. And furthermore, unless we succeed in dealing equitably with health, there's actually no hope for the greening program. So turning to health for a few minutes, with regard to health, it's important to emphasize, first of all, that medicines are not the most vital factor. The most vital factors are actually basic infrastructure: food, water, housing, education, green things, actually. But once these requirements are satisfied, we're left with a need for treatment of disease, and that's what I'm going to think about for the moment. We need research that leads to successful medicines. And here, this channeling effect of the private funding has a number of consequences. In developing countries, we now have the phenomenon of neglected diseases, which you've just heard about. In developed countries, the rich countries, on the other hand, there's excessive production of, frankly, unneeded drugs sold by aggressive and unethical marketing practices, which actually cost twice as much as the research and development process that gave rise to those medicines in the first place. And everywhere, we are facing high costs of treatment for minority diseases. And physicians are fond of saying that in the end, we're all minorities, so we should watch out. But in any event, these are all failures in the just distribution of the fruits of science. Now, the current system is underpinned by the machinery of intellectual property. And I want to refer to this for a moment because we've been working on it. In order to gain control of market revenue for this exploitation of the scientific process, advances are patented at the earliest possible stage and as broadly as possible. Now, it's evident, if one thinks about it, that this is both bad science and bad business. Focus in on the practice of patenting genes as we know it at present. Human genes are being patented, and this is clearly anti-competitive. The protection is being acquired at a stage where most of the uses of the human gene cannot be foreseen, and the subject of the patent cannot be invented around. This is the anti-competitive bit.